The restoration of St. Aldrin's Church had been planned for nearly a year, but no one expected the real story to begin beneath its aging stone floor. Heavy spring rains had weakened part of the church's eastern foundation, leaving cracks that stretched across the basement walls. Engineers assured the townspeople that the damage was minor, yet the repairs required workers to remove several layers of old masonry that had remained untouched for generations. It was slow, dusty work, the kind that rarely produced anything more exciting than broken bricks or forgotten tools. Every morning, the crew arrived before sunrise, their voices echoing through the empty sanctuary, before disappearing into the underground chambers where centuries of damp air clung to every surface. For the first 3 days, nothing unusual happened. Chunks of limestone were carefully removed, rotten wooden supports replaced, and piles of rubble hauled outside. The oldest members of the congregation occasionally wandered downstairs, watching the progress with quiet curiosity while sharing stories about the church's long history. According to local tradition, St. Aldrin's had survived fires, floods, and even a devastating earthquake more than a century earlier. Every repair had been carefully documented, every addition recorded in faded journals, stored inside the church archives. The building's history seemed complete, leaving little room for forgotten secrets. That confidence disappeared on the fourth afternoon. A construction worker swung his sledgehammer against what appeared to be another damaged section of wall. Instead of the solid impact everyone expected, the blow produced a deep, hollow sound that rolled through the basement like distant thunder. The crew immediately stopped working. One man struck the same spot again, and the strange echo returned, unmistakably different from the dense stone surrounding it. Curious, they began removing loose mortar brick by brick until the outline of a perfectly rectangular slab emerged beneath years of careful concealment. It wasn't part of the original foundation. The slab had been deliberately sealed behind an outer wall, hidden so skillfully that generations of builders had either overlooked it or chosen not to acknowledge its existence. Unlike the rough limestone used throughout the basement, this stone was smooth, almost polished, with edges so precise they looked untouched by time. There were no inscriptions, no religious carvings, no decorative symbols, only a silent barrier, standing between the workers and whatever lay beyond it. As they cleared away the remaining debris, an icy draft slipped through a narrow crack along one side of the slab. The temperature in the basement seemed to drop instantly. One worker rubbed his arms, convinced someone had opened an exterior door, but every entrance remained closed. Another leaned closer and claimed he heard something faint beyond the stone. Not a voice exactly, but a rhythmic sound that resembled slow footsteps fading into an endless distance. Word spread through the church within minutes. The foreman ordered everyone to stop working until local officials could inspect the discovery, but curiosity quickly overwhelmed caution. Flashlights illuminated the hidden slab while photographs were taken from every angle. None of the workers could explain why the concealed doorway existed, and none had ever seen craftsmanship quite like it beneath such an ordinary country church. When the town historian arrived, carrying fragile architectural records dating back nearly 200 years, he searched every blueprint, every restoration sketch, and every handwritten note. The measurements matched the basement perfectly, except for one impossible detail. According to every surviving record, the wall standing before them had always been solid stone, with no chamber, no doorway, and certainly no hidden staircase concealed behind it. The following morning, a small group gathered beneath St. Aldrin's Church before sunrise. The town council had approved a preliminary inspection, insisting that only a handful of people would be allowed beyond the sealed entrance. Present were the construction foreman, the church's aging caretaker, the local historian, 2 structural engineers, and a deputy carrying emergency equipment. Their instructions were simple: determine whether the hidden space posed a danger to the church's foundation, and document whatever they found. None of them expected to uncover a mystery that would challenge everything they believed about the town's past. With great care, the workers pried the stone slab away from the concealed opening. It resisted at first, as though it had become part of the surrounding wall, but after several long minutes, it shifted just enough to reveal a narrow gap. A rush of stale, icy air poured from the darkness, carrying the unmistakable scent of damp earth and ancient stone. The flashlights barely penetrated the blackness beyond. Before them stretched a staircase descending at a sharp angle, its steps carved from smooth granite unlike any material used elsewhere in the church. Despite what had to be centuries of abandonment, the staircase was strangely clean. Dust covered the entrance, but not a single step below showed signs of decay, cobwebs, or accumulated debris. The group exchanged uncertain glances before beginning their descent. Each Footstep echoed through the passage in a way that made the staircase seem far deeper than it appeared. The walls narrowed as they continued downward, eventually opening into a circular chamber unlike anything recorded in the town's history. The room was enormous, supported by thick stone pillars blackened with age. Their flashlight beams swept across the walls, revealing hundreds of strange symbols carved directly into the rock. None resembled familiar religious markings. Instead, they formed repeating patterns of circles, intersecting lines and figures with elongated shadows that seemed almost to move whenever the lights shifted. Near the center of the chamber stood a weathered stone altar surrounded by dozens of rusted candle holders. Melted wax still clung to their bases, preserved in thick layers that suggested they had once burned continuously over many years. Behind the altar rested several wooden chests, their iron hinges frozen with corrosion. When one was carefully opened, the explorers found brittle manuscripts wrapped in faded cloth, along with silver medallions engraved with the very same symbols covering the chamber walls. Another chest contained ceremonial robes woven from dark fabric that had somehow survived the passage of time, untouched by moisture or decay. The historian carefully lifted one of the manuscripts, expecting ancient prayers or church records. Instead, every page was filled with unfamiliar writing unlike any language he had studied. Between the lines were detailed illustrations depicting groups of townspeople gathered beneath what appeared to be the same church centuries earlier. Some drawings showed processions carrying lanterns into the underground chamber, while others portrayed villagers kneeling before the stone altar with solemn expressions. One illustration, partially damaged by age, appeared to show a heavy stone doorway being sealed from the outside, while dozens of people watched in silence. Along the outer wall of the chamber, another discovery waited beneath layers of dust. Embedded into the stone were dozens of bronze plaques, each engraved with a date spanning more than 300 years. Curiously, every plaque marked the same day and month despite belonging to different centuries. There were no names, no explanations, only identical dates repeated again and again as though commemorating a single event that had returned generation after generation. It was becoming impossible to believe that this hidden place had simply been forgotten, because every detail suggested it had been deliberately concealed by the town's founders, protected by those who came after them, and erased from history with extraordinary care. The discovery beneath St. Aldrin's Church spread beyond the town far faster than anyone had expected. Within 48 hours, news crews, history enthusiasts and curious visitors began arriving from neighboring counties, eager to catch a glimpse of the hidden staircase that had remained sealed for centuries. Local officials quickly surrounded the church with temporary fencing, allowing only authorized investigators inside, while promising the public that every finding would eventually be released. Their reassurance did little to calm the growing speculation. Social media filled with theories ranging from forgotten religious ceremonies to secret societies that had supposedly operated beneath the church for generations. Yet among the town's oldest residents, the excitement was replaced by something far more unsettling. Many refused to speak about the discovery at all. Those who had spent their entire lives in the town suddenly became withdrawn. Familiar faces stopped gathering outside the grocery store or chatting on front porches during the evening. Curtains remained closed even in broad daylight, and several elderly residents quietly packed their belongings without telling neighbors where they were going. Some claimed they were visiting relatives, while others left no explanation whatsoever. By the end of the week, nearly a dozen of the town's oldest citizens had disappeared without warning. At first, their families assumed the sudden departures were unrelated. Most of the missing residents lived alone and valued their privacy. But when deputies began checking their homes, they found meals left unfinished, television still running, and personal belongings untouched. In one house, a pot of coffee sat cold on the kitchen table beside a newspaper open to an article about the hidden staircase. Another home contained a handwritten calendar with every date crossed off except one. The day the sealed passage had been opened. The disappearances transformed curiosity into fear. Search teams combed nearby forests, abandoned farms, and neighboring towns, yet found no trace of those who had vanished. Surveillance cameras captured nothing unusual. No vehicles leaving in the middle of the night, no signs of forced entry. It was as though the missing residents had simply stepped out of their homes and dissolved into the darkness. Reporters who had arrived hoping to cover an archaeological discovery suddenly found themselves documenting an active mystery. The church itself grew stranger with every passing night. Security guards assigned to protect the underground chamber began reporting unexplained sounds after sunset. Slow footsteps echoed beneath the sanctuary despite the staircase being locked behind reinforced steel barriers. motion sensors activated without recording anyone inside. Flashlights flickered for no apparent reason, and one guard insisted he heard dozens of whispered voices, repeating words he couldn't understand. When investigators reviewed the security footage, the hallways appeared empty, yet the audio clearly captured footsteps descending deeper beneath the church. Then came the first warning. An elderly woman who had lived in town for more than 90 years appeared at the police station shortly before midnight. She was pale, exhausted, and trembling so violently that officers struggled to understand her. Clutching an old wooden rosary in one hand, she begged them to close the staircase before anyone else entered. When asked what frightened her, she stared silently toward the church visible through the station window before whispering that the passage had never been built to hide treasure, relics, or forgotten history. It had been sealed to keep something from remembering the way back to the surface, and every generation before theirs had understood that opening it again was yet a promise the town's founders had sworn would never be fulfilled. The elderly woman's warning refused to leave the investigators' minds. Her words spread quietly among the officials overseeing the excavation, creating an uneasiness that no amount of rational explanation could erase. While engineers continued examining the underground chamber, the town historian became increasingly convinced that the truth would not be found beneath the church alone. If generations of people had deliberately concealed the staircase, then the answers had to exist somewhere in the town's forgotten records. With permission from the church, he began searching through storage rooms that had remained locked for decades, opening weathered cabinets filled with dust-covered boxes, cracked ledgers, and handwritten journals that no one had bothered to read in living memory. Most of the documents described ordinary events, baptisms, marriages, harvest festivals, and repairs to the church. But hidden behind a loose panel inside an old oak cabinet, the historian discovered a narrow wooden chest wrapped in faded linen. Unlike the other records, this chest carried no labels or dates. Inside rested 7 leather-bound journals, each written by a different church caretaker. The oldest was nearly 300 years old, while the newest had been completed less than 40 years earlier. Their pages were yellowed and brittle, yet remarkably well preserved, as though someone had taken extraordinary care to protect them from time. The first journal immediately revealed a disturbing pattern. Each caretaker described inheriting the journals from his predecessor with strict instructions never to destroy them and never to allow anyone outside a small circle of trusted guardians to read them. Every generation had sworn the same oath before accepting responsibility for the church. They were not merely preserving a building, they were preserving a secret. The entries never referred to the hidden chamber as a place of worship or burial. Instead, they called it simply, the place beneath, avoiding its true name as though writing it carried consequences of its own. As the historian continued reading, the journals became increasingly unsettling. They described a meeting held centuries earlier between the town's founders, after a series of unexplained tragedies had nearly wiped out the settlement. Livestock vanished without leaving tracks. Entire families abandoned their homes overnight. Travelers passing through the valley reported hearing voices beneath the ground, calling them by name. The surviving founders became convinced that something hidden beneath the hill had begun reaching toward the surface. Desperate to stop the disappearances, they built the church directly above the underground chamber, believing sacred ground would strengthen whatever barrier already existed below. The journals insisted that the stone staircase had never been intended as an entrance. It was a seal. Once every generation, a handful of chosen guardians descended into the chamber carrying candles, prayers, and a collection of silver medallions, engraved with the strange symbols covering the walls. Their purpose was never fully explained, but every account agreed on one detail. The ritual had to be performed before the same date, marked on every bronze plaque in the chamber. Failure to do so, according to the journals, would allow the barrier to weaken until the thing below remembered the path back into the world above. The final journal was written in hurried, uneven handwriting, its last pages stained as though the author had been writing with trembling hands. Unlike the earlier caretakers, he confessed that fewer people still believed the old stories. The guardians had grown old, their children dismissed the traditions as superstition, and the rituals had quietly stopped. He admitted that he had concealed the staircase behind a new layer of stone, during restoration work decades earlier, hoping future generations would never uncover it. His final entry ended with a single desperate sentence, warning that the greatest danger was never what lay beneath the church, but what would happen once the town forgot why it had been buried there in the first place. The journals left the investigation team with an impossible decision. Every page pointed toward the same conclusion. The hidden staircase had never been a forgotten piece of architecture, but the final barrier, protecting a secret, deliberately erased from history. Some officials demanded that the underground chamber be sealed immediately, arguing that the stories were nothing more than elaborate folklore designed to frighten future generations. Others believed the journals, the disappearances, and the strange events surrounding the church were too closely connected to ignore. After hours of debate, a final expedition was approved. They would descend one last time, document every remaining passage beyond the circular chamber, and permanently close the staircase once their work was complete. Shortly before midnight, the team entered the church carrying high-powered lights, cameras, and scanning equipment. The underground chamber appeared unchanged, yet something about it felt different. The air was colder than before, and every sound lingered unnaturally, bouncing through the stone corridors long after it should have faded. As they examined the walls once more, one engineer noticed a narrow crack behind the ancient altar. The opening had not appeared in any of the photographs taken during previous inspections. When the heavy altar was carefully pushed aside, another staircase emerged, far narrower than the first and descending into complete darkness. Unlike the upper passage, these steps were badly worn, their edges rounded by countless footsteps over hundreds of years. Symbols identical to those carved in the chamber covered the walls, becoming denser as the group descended deeper beneath the earth. Several members reported hearing whispers echoing through the tunnel, but audio equipment recorded only low vibrations that technicians could not explain. The deeper they traveled, the more their electronic devices began malfunctioning. Camera screens flickered with distorted images, batteries drained within minutes, and digital clocks displayed impossible times before shutting down completely. The staircase finally ended inside a vast cavern unlike anything they had imagined. The ceiling disappeared into darkness beyond the reach of their lights, while towering stone columns surrounded a perfectly circular pit carved into the center of the floor. Massive iron chains stretched across the opening, each link thicker than a man's arm and secured to carved pillars blackened with age. The chains were covered with hundreds of silver medallions, identical to those described in the journals. Most had corroded beyond recognition, but several had recently fallen away, lying scattered across the stone floor as though something beneath had shaken them loose. One investigator stepped closer to the pit and directed his flashlight downward. The beam vanished long before reaching the bottom. Instead of striking rock, the light seemed to dissolve into an endless darkness that swallowed every trace of it. Moments later, a deep vibration rolled through the cavern, causing dust to fall from the ceiling. The iron chains groaned under sudden tension, and a sound unlike anything recorded before rose slowly from the abyss. It was not the growl of an animal or the shifting of stone. It resembled dozens of distant voices speaking together in perfect harmony, each whisper growing clearer, until several members of the team realized they were hearing their own names called from somewhere below. Panic spread instantly. As the cavern trembled again, the remaining medallions began snapping from the chains one by one, striking the floor with sharp metallic echoes. The historian reached into his bag, removed the last untouched silver medallion recovered from the upper chamber, and remembered the journal's final instruction. Without hesitation he placed it onto the broken chain stretched across the pit. The moment the metal locked into place, the whisper stopped, the vibration ceased. Silence returned so suddenly that no one dared breathe. Standing in the darkness, the survivors understood they had uncovered the truth their ancestors had sacrificed generations to protect. The hidden staircase had never concealed a forgotten chapter of history. It had concealed history's greatest warning, and whether they revealed what they had witnessed or buried it forever would determine if the town remained safe for another generation, or if the darkness beneath the church would one day find its way back to the world above.